My siblings mocked me for inheriting Dad's junk gas station until they saw the 200 Milner's secret. Most people know me as Leighton Meester, 35 years old, living quietly in a dusty corner of Arizona that barely shows up on a GPS, on paper. I'm an underemployed civil engineer and part-time cashier. But that's not how my story started or how it ends. See? 3 months ago. My father passed away after a sudden heart attack in the back office of the gas station he ran for almost 50 years. He collapsed between 2 shelves of motor oil and windshield fluid. That's the place I inherited. Not his savings, not his pension. Just that forgotten station with a flickering neon sign and a leaky roof that buzzed louder than the air conditioner. My older brother, Jared, and my younger sister, Monica, practically laughed when they heard the news. They flew in from Seattle and Austin, both dressed in sleek black like they were attending a corporate gala, not our father's funeral. They whispered to each other during the service, shaking their heads like I had tricked him into leaving the scraps to me. Jared is 41, a senior consultant with some firm I can never remember the name of. Always busy, always loud. Monica is 33, a lifestyle coach with 200,000 followers and 0 presence at family events. I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who missed graduation to care for our mom when her kidneys gave out. I'm the one who picked Dad up from the VA hospital when the doctors said they couldn't stabilize his blood pressure. And I'm the one who took a job pumping gas and managing the books when he couldn't do it anymore. It wasn't glamorous. I wasn't living in a high-rise or going to brunch, but I was there every single day. That didn't matter to them. At the reading of the will, Jared sat smug and expectant. Monica was already looking up vacation homes on her phone. The lawyer, an old friend of my father's named Alan Reese, read it slowly and clearly. To Jared and Monica Meester, I leave the sum of $50,000 each, with hopes that it brings them peace and clarity. That was it. No properties, no land, no shares, just cash. They blinked like deer in headlights. Jared leaned forward and muttered, "Is that a joke?" Monica hissed something about contesting the will. Then Alan continued, "To my daughter Leighton, who stood beside me through storms and silence, I leave the Meester Gas and Repair Station, all adjacent properties, and contents therein." The room went silent. Monica scoffed. "That rotting shack," Jared added. "He must have been delusional. There's nothing there but rust and debt." I said nothing. I didn't want to fight, but I felt the ache of years rising in my chest. Years they weren't there. Afterward. They followed me into the parking lot, both of them now suddenly interested in my inheritance. Jared put on his fake older brother voice and said, "Look, it's not personal, but you can't manage that place alone. Let us help you sell it. Split the proceeds. We can get you out of here." Monica nodded. "We'll even give you 10% more than your share. Think about it. Lee, you've done your time in this dead-end life. Time to move forward." That's when I realized something. They weren't just mocking the gas station. They were mocking me, my choices, my commitment, my life. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Dad and I shared more than just space and silence. He trusted me. And right before he passed, he left me something more valuable than anything money could buy. A clue, something buried beneath the dirt and regret of that gas station, something he never got to explain. But I was starting to understand. Not everything valuable comes with a price tag. Some inheritances take time to reveal themselves. I went back to the station that night, sat in the creaky swivel chair behind the dusty counter, and looked out at the empty pumps flickering under the dim lights. Jared and Monica thought I'd inherited a burden, but something told me I'd just inherited the most important secret of my father's life. The next morning, I walked the property line with a legal pad and a cup of black coffee. trying to shake the image of Jared rolling his eyes and Monica scoffing like I had just inherited a rusted-out bike instead of a whole business. The truth was, the gas station did look like it belonged in a movie set from the 80s, 2 pumps that clicked slow as molasses, a cracked, oil-stained parking lot, and a roof patched with mismatched shingles. The garage door creaked whenever I pulled it open, and inside was a smell only time could make dust, grease, and old leather. Dad's toolbox sat exactly where he left it. His clipboard still had the last invoice he'd signed 2 days before he died. But as I walked through it all, I couldn't ignore the way he had started locking certain drawers, filing things under codes, and leaving receipts marked with red stars. Something didn't add up. Dad wasn't sentimental, not like that. If he had marked something, there was a reason. And suddenly I wasn't just dealing with grief. I was dealing with questions. Monica texted me that afternoon, just a casual message laced in polished condescension. "Hey, Lee, Jared and I are talking to a real estate group that might want to take the station off your hands. High 6 figures. Think about it. No name, no offer sheet, no details, just the assumption that I'd jump at the first chance to get out of here." Jared followed up with a call that same evening. "Listen," he said, voice full of fake warmth. "We know it's a lot for you. It's not your fault you got stuck with this. You've always been more grounded. But this doesn't have to define you." I could feel the insult hidden in the compliment. I could also feel something stronger rise in my chest, anger. Not loud, not explosive, just steady, quiet. Like a switch had flipped, and I finally saw them clearly. Later that night, I pulled open the old safe behind Dad's office door. It was an analog beast with a dial and a sticky hinge. I had tried a dozen combinations in the past, never got it open, but now, sitting there in silence, I tried one more Dad's wedding anniversary. The door creaked open. Inside was a small metal box, 2 envelopes, and a single key with a tag that read, "South Line." One envelope held property document surveys, county deeds, even mineral rights transfers. Most were signed quietly over a 30-year span. The second envelope contained a handwritten note that simply said, "It's under your feet, but the world isn't ready. You will know when you are." And suddenly, something shifted inside me. I walked out the back, past the tool shed, into the overgrown weeds where Dad always said not to waste time. There, half buried in brush and thorns, was a slab of concrete no bigger than a car hood. The key didn't fit any locks on it, but there was something under that slab. I could feel it in my bones. And I realized, for the first time in weeks, I wasn't just reacting. I was investigating. I was moving forward. And I wasn't about to tell Jared or Monica a damn thing. The next day, I caught a man in a suit taking pictures of the property from across the street. When I approached him, he said he was from the Community Renewal Initiative, mumbled something about zoning interest, then practically ran to his car. He didn't even bother hiding the drone case in his back seat. That night, the mayor's assistant emailed me some vague concerns about environmental risks, surprise inspections, compliance paperwork I hadn't filed. I called the county clerk. "I've never had someone dig that deep into a family business." She said, "Whatever you're sitting on, someone wants it bad." And just like that, the pressure came crashing in. My internet went out for days. The city slapped the station with a $12,000 retroactive fine for parking surface violations. Then, someone broke into the garage, but stole nothing, just scattered my files and left tire tracks out back. I felt like the walls were closing in. Jared sent another text. "This is getting complicated. Lee, take the deal. It's best for everyone. But the thing is, the harder they pushed, the more determined I became. This wasn't just about a gas station anymore. It was about my father's legacy, about how easily they'd all written me off, about how nobody expected me to dig deeper, but I was done letting other people write my story. As I stood out back under the dying porch light, holding the rusted key in one hand and that quiet little note in the other, something shifted in me again. Not rage, not fear, just resolve. If the world wasn't ready, I would be. I didn't know what I'd find beneath that slab, but I knew one thing for sure: my siblings thought they'd mocked me into submission. They had no idea they'd just challenged me into awakening. 2 days later, Monica showed up unannounced. Her car door didn't even fully shut before she was already halfway across the parking lot in her white blazer. Heels too clean for this kind of ground, sunglasses perched high like a wall between us. "You're being irrational," she said, skipping over the greeting entirely. "This property is deteriorating. The fines are piling up. Jared and I are just trying to protect you from making a mistake you can't undo." I let her talk. That's what she was good at, talking in circles until the other person felt small. But I didn't feel small. I felt something steadier now, like a wire had tightened between my chest and my spine. I crossed my arms and watched her scan the property like it was a crime scene. Her eyes flicked toward the south fence. She wasn't here to visit. She was here to confirm something. "I know you found something," she said finally, voice lower now. "We've had some inquiries. Buyers. They're willing to go as high as $500, $1,000. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have words, but because hers weren't worth answering. What I found wasn't for sale. What I found wasn't even fully mine yet. It was a puzzle one my father left me, piece by piece, across files and maps, and the silent habits he had built over years. I had spent every night since unlocking the safe trying to make sense of those documents. Geological readings, mineral patterns, and acquisition deeds for empty lots Dad had quietly bought in his name, most of which even Monica and Jared didn't know about. That same night, someone filed a report claiming I was operating a hazardous facility without proper clearance. A team of 3 inspectors arrived the next morning, 2 men and a woman. They didn't look around the gas station itself. They walked straight to the field behind the garage toward the slab. That's when I knew for sure someone had told them where to look. Someone who didn't just guess. Someone who knew. One of the men crouched down and pressed a device against the ground. The woman took photos from every angle. I stood there, arms crossed, not interfering, just watching, because sometimes watching is the most powerful thing you can do. When I called the city for answers, I got vague words like compliance, public concern, development interest. The mayor's office dodged me. My email inbox flooded with anonymous offers from LLCs I couldn't trace. Then a letter arrived, formal intent to buy at $1.2 million, no names, just signatures from a firm based out of Delaware. Clean, untouchable. A number like that could change most lives. But what none of them understood was that I wasn't waiting on money. I was waiting on clarity. Because if this thing buried beneath my feet was really what I was starting to believe it was, then selling would be the most expensive mistake of my life. That weekend, I drove 2 hours north to meet with a retired geologist. Dad used to mention Dr. Ronald Finch. He looked surprised when I introduced myself, but his face shifted when I handed him one of Dad's survey reports. "Frank Meester," he muttered, eyebrows raising. "Persistent bastard." Then he smiled. Smart too. Very, very smart. He spent 2 hours with me going over data points I didn't fully understand, highlighting anomalies and phrases like subsurface mineral density and strategic extraction. Then he paused and looked up. "Do you know what this could be?" I shook my head. "Lithium," he said, "or something close to it. You'd need newer samples. But this could be real." He didn't even blink before adding, "If people are circling, it's not just a guess anymore." I drove home in silence, windows down, the desert air burning my arms but clearing my head. I thought about Dad, how he used to sit in the back office staring out the window, cup of coffee in hand, eyes heavy with something I never understood, not sadness, not fear, just weight. A man who knew more than he said, who planned deeper than he let on. And now I was starting to see it all, the locked cabinets, the star-marked maps, the odd conversations with men I never knew. It wasn't random. It wasn't sentimental. It was a blueprint. When I returned that evening, Jared was waiting in his Tesla out front. He stepped out casually, like he had just swung by on his way to somewhere more important. "Let's be honest," he said before I could open my mouth. "You can't hold this place together. You've been here too long to see it clearly." Then he pulled out a folder and handed it to me. Inside was a full redevelopment proposal renderings, timelines, contractor bids, all ready, all signed. "We can make this easy. Clean exit. You'll walk away with enough to start something new. We're not the enemy." "Lee," I looked at the folder, then at him, then back at the building behind me, and for the first time in years, I realized I had stopped seeing that place as a burden. I saw it now for what it really was, a doorway. "You can go," I said, handing the folder back. "And next time, bring a lawyer." "Not a folder." Jared didn't argue. He just nodded, tight-lipped, and got back into his car. As he drove off, I turned and walked toward the slab with the key in my pocket and my pulse calm. The world had underestimated me. My siblings had erased me, but my father had prepared me. I wasn't just holding on anymore. I was getting ready to unlock everything. I waited until after midnight when the town's only bar closed and the last pickup rolled past the station with a crowbar, gloves, and a floodlight clipped to the back fence. I returned to the concrete slab. It was colder than expected for a desert night. The silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt alert, as if the ground itself knew I was about to disrupt something it had guarded for decades. I pried at the edges, cleared years of packed dirt, and finally exposed the seam of what looked like a buried metal hatch. It wasn't industrial, not city-made. This was custom, Dad custom. The key I'd found in his safe had no label, but when I pressed it into the rusted lock on the hatch, it turned with a stiff groan that echoed louder than any noise I'd heard in days. I held my breath and pulled. The hatch lifted slowly, revealing a narrow metal stairwell leading into darkness. A dusty wave of earth and oil drifted up, as if the past had been trapped down there, waiting to exhale. I hesitated, flashlight in one hand, doubts in the other. But then I thought of Dad's note. "It's under your feet, but the world isn't ready. You will know when you are." Maybe I didn't know, but I was ready anyway. I stepped down. The air grew colder with each stair. The chamber below was small but deliberate, an 8x10 room with a low ceiling, concrete walls, and a single steel desk bolted to the far side. Filing cabinets lined one wall, still labeled in Dad's familiar handwriting, mineral rights, survey data, legal, and a final drawer marked only with an asterisk. I didn't start with that one. I started with the maps, dozens of them, hand-noted with coordinates, dates, and overlapping circles surrounding this very plot of land. A pattern began forming acquisition trails, survey layers, cross-sections of soil composition. This wasn't theory. This was method. This was intention. I opened the next cabinet. Inside was a stack of letters, many from state departments and engineering consultants. Phrases repeated: core sample positive, unconfirmed deposits, rare earth elements detected. The word that stood out over and over again, lithium. That's when it hit me. Dad didn't leave me a gas station. He left me the lid to a vault. one no one else was supposed to open. And now that I had, the storm above ground made sense. The inspectors, the sudden offers, Jared's redevelopment pitch, Monica's fake concern. They weren't guessing. They were trying to get ahead of something. I pulled the last drawer open, the one marked with the asterisk. Inside was a single item, a locked metal box with no label. And for a second, I just stared at it. There was something final about its silence. I took it upstairs, cleaned it, and brought it to the locksmith the next day. He cracked it open in under 10 minutes, barely glancing at me. Inside was a geologist's final report. Unlike the older documents, this one was dated just 4 months before Dad passed. Attached was a signed evaluation from a private consulting firm confirming high-grade lithium deposits beneath our property. With an estimated market value of $200 million at current extraction costs. My hands went cold, my mouth dry. I blinked over and over, not to believe it, but to control myself from reacting too soon. The confirmation was real, the value was real, and so were the consequences. I walked back to the gas station that afternoon and sat at the register in silence, looking at customers who paid for gas without knowing what was under their feet. And I realized the reason Dad never told me wasn't that he didn't trust me. It was that he did. He trusted me enough to handle this when it was time. He knew my siblings wouldn't. He knew the moment money entered the picture, everything else would collapse. That night, Jared called again. His tone had changed. It was tighter now, rehearsed. Lee, let's cut the nonsense. I know you're sitting on something valuable. You don't have the resources to protect it. Let's partner. We'll structure the deal properly. Give you equity. I let him speak until the desperation cracked through the polish. When he finally asked, "What do you even plan to do with all that?" I paused, smiled, and said, "Something you never expected me to. I wasn't interested in revenge. That would have been too easy. I was interested in control, in holding the thing they never thought I could value, not just the mineral kind, but the kind you earn by choosing the long road, the kind that isn't handed to you, but built slowly in silence. I made one call to Dad's lawyer, Alan, and asked about legal protections. He said he'd been waiting for this call. He explained that Dad had created a trust 5 years ago, separate from the will, placing ownership of all land and mineral rights into my name upon his death. Irrevocable, uncontestable, ironclad. The will had been for show. The real legacy was beneath it. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't defending myself. I wasn't proving my worth. I was holding it, and I wasn't planning to let go. The news didn't take long to leak. Within days of confirming the lithium reserve and securing my legal ownership, I noticed unfamiliar cars parked near the property line, people snapping pictures from across the highway, drones hovering higher than usual. At first, I told myself it was just curiosity, but when my mailbox was pried open for the second time and my trash bins overturned in the night, I knew someone wasn't just watching, they were digging, and I wasn't surprised when Monica showed up again, this time without Jared, dressed down in jeans and a soft cardigan, pretending this was a sisterly check-in. "Can we talk?" she asked, leaning against the frame of the station office like she belonged there. I didn't invite her in. She didn't expect me to. She just looked around and said, "This isn't going to end well if we keep fighting each other." I looked at her and waited. She shifted, probably uncomfortable with silence. "You've always been the heart, Lee, and I get it now. You stuck around. You saw things we didn't. Maybe we were selfish. Maybe we didn't understand Dad like you did." She exhaled, long and rehearsed, but I think we can still fix this. Together. Jared's on board. We'd be willing to do a full equity restructure, 1/3 each. You'd still stay in control. On paper. Her eyes lingered on mine like she thought empathy could erase manipulation. I didn't answer her directly. I just asked, why now? She hesitated. That was all I needed. There was no apology in her voice, just calculation wrapped in nostalgia. I let her finish her pitch, nodded slowly, then told her I had meetings and couldn't stay long. She left quietly. No threats this time. That scared me more than the last visit, that night. My apartment was broken into, nothing stolen, just drawers left open, papers moved, my laptop unplugged, and Baxter, my 12-year-old lab mix, was missing. I tore through every alley, every fence line, every possible hiding spot. For hours, I walked until my legs throbbed. I finally found him limping toward the station from 2 blocks away, confused but safe, his leash still on like someone had tried to drag him and gave up. I dropped to my knees and cried into his fur, not from fear, but from fury. This wasn't just pressure. This was escalation. I called Alan the next morning. We're past legal threats. I told him, we need to prepare for something worse. He agreed. He said he'd already filed security provisions, flagged the trust in every public system, and connected me with a discreet consulting firm specializing in mineral asset protection. They think you're alone, he said calmly. Let's show them you're not. That same week, I was introduced to a team of engineers and environmental specialists, people Dad had quietly vetted years ago but never activated. One of them, a woman named Carla Hensley, had worked in Chile, Australia, and parts of Utah. She didn't ask questions about the family mess. She looked over the reports, nodded, and said, if this is what I think it is, we're sitting on a strategic gold mine, but you need to act fast. Once word spreads, they'll come with lawsuits, PR campaigns, maybe even state-level interference. I asked what she recommended. She said 3 words, build your shield. So I did. Over the next few weeks, I formed a holding company named Meester Terra, filed mineral rights protections with both federal and state entities, and retained a legal team that specialized in trust law and resource sovereignty. I didn't go to war. I fortified. I moved my base of operation from the apartment to the office above the garage. I installed cameras, kept backup files in 3 separate locations, and digitized every note Dad left behind. All the while, I said nothing to Jared or Monica. No updates, no acknowledgments, just silence. That's when the media campaign began. An anonymous article ran in a local business paper accusing Meester Gas of environmental damage and unethical land hoarding. The quotes were vague, the sources unnamed, but the timing was surgical. A reporter even tried to ambush me at the pump, waving a microphone and asking if I was exploiting the community's land for personal gain. I just looked at her and said, my father gave his life to this land. I'm giving mine to protect it. She didn't air that clip. I checked. Then Jared made one last move. He sent an email short, clipped, no salutation. This isn't over. You're not strong enough to keep this, one way or another. We're getting our peace. I stared at those words for a long time, and for the first time since this all began. I didn't feel cornered. I felt calm. They were lashing out because they were losing control, because the little sister they thought would fold had learned to hold. And what they still didn't understand was that I wasn't fighting to win. I had already won. I was fighting to protect what had been earned not just by me, but by the man who saw further than anyone else. 3 weeks after the article dropped, the mayor called a town development forum and, predictably, My name came up. He framed it as a chance to hear from all sides, but I saw through it immediately. Jared and Monica were in attendance, seated front row, dressed like they were still on the company payroll of whatever real estate syndicate had coached them. There were slides, graphs, and even a short video about sustainable growth and how dormant lands could serve the greater economic good. The gas station, my gas station, was shown in a slide titled Underutilized Assets. No one said my name directly, but the message was clear. I wasn't an owner. I was an obstacle. One of the attendees stood up and asked about community impact. Jared answered first. Voice steady. We believe the land has potential beyond its current use. We're offering long-term jobs, clean energy infrastructure, and tax revenue. This isn't personal. It's progress. Monica chimed in next. More polished. We grew up in that town. We love it. We just want to see it thrive again. I sat in the back, watching every word land like a soft bullet. They still didn't know I had already filed a full environmental and economic development proposal for Meester Terra through the State Mineral Authority. They didn't know the trust was publicly listed and immutable. They didn't know I had met with county planners privately to secure a zoning overlay that protected the extraction zone from commercial redevelopment for 5 years. But they would, the moment they submitted their plans. They'd be denied automatically, and there would be no appeal, because I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was building quietly in the dark while they shouted under the spotlight. The next day, Olivia, the town's most notorious gossip columnist, approached me outside the hardware store. Heard your sister's thinking of suing again, she whispered, eyes lit like she already had the headline written. I smiled. Let her try. She blinked. You sound different. Leighton. I nodded. I am. It wasn't a boast. It was a fact. I had spent too long waiting for permission. Now I was just executing the plan. My plan. Back at the station, Carla and her team were preparing to bring in the first phase of lithium analysis equipment. Everything was quiet, discreet, conducted under a non-disclosure shield. The engineers worked nights, no heavy machinery, no visible change, but the data was promising. Carla reviewed the results, then looked at me across the small break room table and said, if these readings hold, you're sitting on one of the most viable domestic lithium reserves in the Southwest. She paused. You ready to be the face of this? I took a breath. Only if I can protect what it stands for. That same week, I found another flash drive buried inside Dad's old thermos, of all places. It contained a video from 9 months before he passed. He looked tired, older, but sharper than ever. He stared into the lens like he was seeing right through the future. If you're watching this, Lee, it means they came for it. Maybe not in the way we expected, but they came, and you're still standing. He paused, then chuckled dryly. I knew you would be. You didn't need the big city to matter. You needed silence. You needed time. And if you're in that office now, if you found the truth, then you know what you're guarding isn't just wealth, it's legacy. It's proof that something slow, honest, and grounded can still win. I didn't cry watching it. I just sat quietly, absorbing the weight of his words. He had seen it all coming, not just the legal games or the media attacks, but the need for a new kind of strength, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that outlasts. A few days later, a final move came in, a subpoena. Monica and Jared were attempting to challenge the legitimacy of the trust on grounds of diminished mental capacity. They claimed Dad had been manipulated, that I had isolated him. The court date was fast-tracked. I showed up with Alan and our legal team. Monica wore all white like she was stepping into sainthood. Jared brought a stack of fake financial projections. They underestimated me again. They didn't know I had Dad's medical files, his therapist's written testimony, and video evidence of his full capacity during the time the trust was signed. When the judge read through the documents, she barely looked up. After 20 minutes of deliberation, she dismissed the case with prejudice. This trust is clear, thorough, and legally sound. She said, any further attempt to contest it will be seen as harassment. As we walked out, Monica tried one last appeal. Lee, wait. I turned slowly. You've made your point. Fine, you won, but we're still family. I stared at her, truly stared, and answered calmly, no, we were. Then you turned this into business. So let's keep it business. That was the end of it. They didn't come back after that. They didn't call, didn't send emails. For the first time in a year, the silence around the station wasn't hostile. It was earned. And in that silence, I finally felt what Dad had meant. The world may not be ready, but I was, after the court ruling. Something shifted, not just legally, but emotionally. I wasn't on defense anymore. The fear, the doubt, the hesitation that had shadowed every decision, every conversation, finally began to dissolve. The station, once a ghost of my father's generation, was now alive in a new way. Technicians arrived quietly at nightfall. Trucks unloaded equipment behind blackout tarps, and we began phase 1 of the lithium validation. Still, I said nothing to the town, to the press, or to the people who once whispered behind my back. I let silence work for me the way noise had once worked against me. But even in peace, I didn't relax, because I understood now some victories don't need to be loud. Some power is most effective when it's held, not displayed. I worked 12-hour days, reviewed geological data, signed off on subcontractors, monitored every safety protocol. I learned how to protect the land without exploiting it, how to set boundaries without burning bridges. I built a small, trusted team around me, engineers, lawyers, one former environmental activist who had worked against extraction projects but changed sides after seeing how differently we were doing it. We kept everything off the radar. No marketing, no announcements, no press releases, just data, results, and forward motion. Then, one evening, I received a handwritten letter from someone I didn't expect, my mom's sister, Aunt Rose. We hadn't spoken in years. She'd stayed distant during Mom's illness, and after Dad passed. She'd only sent a one-line condolence card, but the letter was different. It said, I saw your name in the hearing report. I saw what they tried to do. Your mother would be proud, not just of what you found, but how you're carrying it. There was no plea for money, no invitation, just recognition, honest, unexpected, and it meant more than I admitted at first, because even when you grow resilient, even when you learn to stop needing validation, a kind word from someone who once looked away can still land soft in your chest, like proof that maybe all this weight hasn't made you hard, just sharper. A week later, the mayor's office reached out, this time with an entirely different tone. They requested a formal meeting to discuss possible partnership opportunities between Meester Terra and the county's new clean energy initiative. I arrived on time, alone, in a gray blazer and dusty boots. The mayor shook my hand like he hadn't tried to shut me down 6 months ago. His assistant poured coffee. The presentation was crisp, full of buzzwords: renewable zones, community reinvestment, sustainability grants. When they finished, the mayor leaned forward and said, We'd love to have your project included in our regional proposal. If you're open to collaboration. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just asked, what changed? He paused, choosing his words carefully. Frankly, We underestimated the integrity of your operation and its potential scale. That was the closest thing I'd ever get to an apology. I nodded once. We'll consider it, but under our terms. The room went quiet for a moment, not tense, just aware, because now they understood I wasn't just the daughter of an old mechanic running a forgotten gas station. I was the architect of something real, something controlled, something protected. As word began to circulate quietly, still unofficial people in town started looking at me differently. The clerk at the post office asked how Baxter was doing. The barista who once got my name wrong every morning started calling me Miss Meester. I wasn't fooled by the sudden politeness, but I wasn't bitter about it either. People shift when the narrative shifts. And for the first time, I was writing my own, one evening, just before closing up the office. I stood on the back porch of the station and watched the sun drop behind the desert hills. Baxter sat next to me, older now, slower, but still alert. I thought about how far we'd come, not just in distance, but in belief, in who I had to become to survive this. Not tougher, exactly, just more deliberate, more sure. I no longer flinched when the phone rang. I no longer shrank at legal threats or dirty tactics because I knew something they didn't. I knew what it cost to stay. I knew what it took to fight quietly. And I knew what was buried beneath this ground wasn't just a mineral deposit. It was the proof of everything I'd endured, everything Dad had risked, and everything they had tried to erase. That's when I made a decision, not to stay small, not to stay quiet forever, but to choose the moment, to wait until we were ready, to tell the full story, not for revenge, not for pity, but because someone out there might need to hear that it's possible to be doubted, dismissed, manipulated, and still rise, not with anger, but with precision and peace. 3 months after the ruling, we hit our first official milestone. The results from Phase 2 confirmed what we'd suspected all along, not just lithium, but high-grade, concentrated deposits with low environmental resistance and ideal depth for precision extraction. Carla called it the cleanest underground structure she'd ever worked with. The value was no longer speculative. It was real, measurable, and climbing every day with global demand. I sat in that same worn-out swivel chair behind the station counter and looked at the printout, the gas station, the place people once laughed at, mocked me for inheriting, was sitting on a potential reserve worth over $200 million. And I still hadn't said a word publicly, not one press release, not one article. I didn't need headlines. I had something stronger proof. Meanwhile, Monica sent a final email, no subject line, just a sentence. We didn't know what we were doing. I didn't respond, not because I hated her, but because the silence between us had said more than words ever could. Jared didn't reach out at all. Last I heard, he had moved into a position at some energy consulting firm in Austin. Maybe that's what he wanted all along. Leverage, titles, to be seen as someone powerful. But what neither of them ever realized was that power doesn't come from grabbing. It comes from enduring, from knowing exactly what you've got and never blinking when someone tries to take it. Back at the station, I started renovating slowly, not to look flashy, but to feel functional. A new roof, new signage, one updated pump. The original garage remained intact. I wanted to keep the soul of the place, the smell of oil and dust. The metal chest Dad used to sit on, the cracked stool that still wobbled when I turned too fast. Some things weren't meant to be replaced. They were meant to be remembered around this time. Local officials invited me to speak at the annual Economic Development Forum. They wanted me to talk about emerging industries and responsible extraction. I almost said no, but something inside me whispered it was time. not for attention, but for direction. I stood behind the podium in front of 50 people, many of whom had once ignored me, underestimated me, and some who'd actively tried to erase me. I spoke calmly. When I inherited my father's gas station, most people thought I inherited a burden. Some called it a mistake. Others offered to take it off my hands. But what they didn't understand is that legacy doesn't always look like success at first. Sometimes it looks like rusted pumps, cracked concrete, and silence. But it's still legacy. There was no applause, just stillness, respectful, real. That's all I needed. I wasn't there to impress. I was there to signal that this was just the beginning, after the event. A young woman approached me. She was maybe 25, nervous, holding a resume in her hand. "I grew up here," she said. "My dad worked for your dad when he was younger. If you're hiring, I'd love to learn from you." I took her name, not because I needed more staff just yet, but because I remembered what it felt like to be overlooked, to be willing, but invisible. A few days later, I returned to the underground office beneath the hatch. I hadn't been there in weeks. Dust had settled back in, but everything else was untouched. I opened one of the older filing drawers and found a box of cassette tapes, handwritten labels, personal, 1995, 2002. I dug out an old player from Dad's workshop and sat down to listen. Most were voice memos, daily thoughts, worries, ideas he never shared. But one tape stopped me cold. June 3rd, 2001. His voice was younger, steadier. "Lee's helping me in the shop today. She doesn't know it, but she already sees things clearer than most adults. She asks questions no one else does. I think she's going to be the one who keeps this going." He laughed, soft and proud. "Jared and Monica are sharp, but Lee listens. That's what this place needs, someone who listens." I closed my eyes and let the sound settle over me like armor. He had known, long before anyone else did, that night. I drafted something I hadn't written in years, a mission statement, not for marketing, but for clarity, for myself. Mr. Terra is built on legacy, patience, and proof. We don't chase opportunity. We protect it. We don't promise shortcuts. We build through stewardship, and we don't ask to be trusted. We earn it. I printed it, pinned it to the office wall. No logo, no slogan, just truth. And as I turned off the lights, locked up, and stepped outside into the sharp desert air, I felt something I hadn't felt since the beginning. Not vindication, not revenge, just peace. The kind you don't need to announce. The kind you carry quietly. Because after everything, the dismissal, the mockery, the sabotage, I hadn't just held on. I had built forward by spring. The station no longer looked like the joke everyone once whispered about. The rusted signage had been restored, same shape, same letters, just cleaner. The pumps worked without groaning. The interior no longer smelled like forgotten winters and half-spilled gasoline, but carried the light scent of old pine and warm oil. The town had adjusted, slowly, to the fact that Meester Gas wasn't closing, wasn't selling, wasn't going anywhere, and more importantly, that I wasn't going anywhere, not to follow Jared's blueprint or Monica's PR-friendly version of legacy. I was writing my own, and people were starting to notice not just what I was building, but how I was doing it. That's when the state called. A quiet inquiry from someone in the Department of Energy Transition Programs. They'd received anonymous tips that a small operator might be sitting on an unregulated lithium reserve. They were polite, vague, and careful not to overstep, but I knew what it was, pressure disguised as interest. I invited them to a private on-site tour. No press, no security, just transparency. I walked them through the garage, the underground chamber, the verified readings, the trust papers, the environmental compliance reports. They left with more than they expected, including respect. One of them, an older analyst named Harris, shook my hand and said, "I've never seen a private operator this far ahead of the narrative." I smiled. That's because we weren't trying to win headlines, just protect truth. But quiet success doesn't stay quiet for long. The second, a national lithium forecast, featured Mr. Terra as an emerging strategic contributor. The phones started ringing, mining firms, journalists, former classmates I hadn't heard from in 12 years. A major magazine even asked to run a profile. I said no, not yet. Not because I was afraid of visibility, but because this story wasn't about the lithium. It was about what had to be survived to get here. And most people don't care about the part where you're on the floor at 2 a.m. wondering if you're crazy for still holding on. They only want the photo of you standing on top. That same week, Jared finally returned, not with lawyers, not with offers, but with a manila envelope. He waited in the parking lot until I stepped outside. No small talk, just handed me the envelope and said, "I thought you might want these." Inside were old photos. Mom, Dad, me as a kid playing in the back lot with a wrench in one hand and a walkie-talkie in the other. A birthday card I'd made in crayon. An old newspaper clipping about the station winning a Service of the Year award in 1994. I looked at him. He looked tired, thinner, less sharp. I didn't understand any of this. He said, "Not when it mattered." I nodded, but said nothing. He didn't stay long, didn't ask for a second chance, just left. That night, I sat in the back lot and looked through the photos again. There were no secrets in them, just time, proof that this place had always been more than it looked like. And maybe that's what Dad knew all along. That value doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits, quietly, until someone finally listens. I got up, stretched, and walked toward the far fence where the old hatch still sat sealed. We didn't use it much anymore. Everything had been digitized and moved to a climate-controlled facility nearby. But I hadn't closed it off. It reminded me where all this came from, how deep you sometimes have to go to understand what's worth protecting. I stood there for a while, hand resting on the rusted handle, eyes closed, just breathing. Baxter limped up beside me, older now, mostly deaf, but still alert when he needed to be. He pressed against my leg and let out a soft exhale, as if he understood that something was ending and beginning all at once. I crouched beside him and whispered, "We did it, old man." He leaned his head into my chest like he'd been waiting to hear that for months. The next morning, I signed the final joint venture agreement with our operations partner. No ownership relinquished, just support logistics, safety, compliance. The terms were clean, built around long-term sustainability, and protected by a clause Dad would have been proud of. No extraction without ecological guarantees. No expansions without town council oversight, and 10% of net revenue allocated to a community reinvestment fund. That night, I made a quiet post on the station's long-dead Facebook page, just a photo of the sunrise behind the new sign, with the caption, "Still here, still family run, just a little more powered up now." The likes rolled in slowly, mostly from locals, a few shares, no hashtags, no marketing push, just real people seeing something they used to drive past every day finally become more than what it appeared. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was the story all along. Not that I found something worth millions, but that I didn't let anyone convince me it was worthless. A few months after the joint venture was finalized, I found myself standing on a panel at a regional clean energy summit It wasn't something I had sought out. I wasn't the kind of person who liked stages or microphones, but they asked me to speak about land stewardship, legacy, and how private citizens can reshape public energy conversations. I kept it simple. I told the story of a daughter who inherited a gas station everyone thought was worthless, who stayed behind while the rest of the family chased better zip codes and better titles, who kept the books, held the wrench, locked the doors at night, and found, hidden beneath it all, not just a deposit of lithium, but a different kind of wealth, one rooted in time, silence, and belief, not in miracles, but in endurance. There was no dramatic standing ovation, just quiet applause. A few nods from people who saw through the polish and recognized something that felt familiar. I left that event without fanfare, changed back into boots in the car, and stopped by the station before heading home. It was late, the shop closed, the town asleep. I unlocked the side door, flicked on the soft overhead light, and stood at the counter where this all began. There was a framed photo of Dad I had finally put up behind the register. He wasn't smiling. He was just looking ahead like he always had. Arms crossed, quiet strength in his posture. I stood in front of him and said, "You were right. Not loud, not theatrical. Just enough for me to hear it." Later that night, I pulled out one of the older boxes I hadn't opened yet. Inside were handwritten journals, Dad's daily logs from the early 2000s, before the arthritis, before the strokes, back when the station still ran 7 days a week and he did everything himself. One entry stopped me Lee's upstairs doing homework. She asked me today if staying in one place means you're stuck. I didn't know how to answer. Maybe I'm stuck, or maybe I'm building something I just don't get to finish. Maybe she will. I sat with that sentence a long time. Maybe she will. Maybe that's all this ever was. One generation carrying the weight just far enough so the next can pick it up and move it forward. Not with noise, but with purpose. In the following months, we began extraction in a way that defied every narrative they once used against me. No invasive drills, no ecological disruption. The data was strong, and so was the plan. Investors came, not the loud ones, but the right ones, the kind that valued slow growth and clean practice over headlines. We built something more than a mining operation. We built a model. Other small landowners from nearby towns started visiting the station, asking how they could protect what was theirs. Some had no lithium, no copper, no rare metals. But they had stories, families, roots, and they didn't want to be erased just because someone with a polished offer showed up with a smile by the 1-year mark. The town had changed in subtle but permanent ways. The mayor stopped pretending he'd always supported us and instead asked how the local high school could partner with our project. A scholarship fund was created in Dad's name for students who wanted to study environmental engineering or mineral law. Jared didn't return. Monica emailed once more a short message saying she was in therapy and working on understanding her pattern of entitlement. I didn't reply, not because I held anger, but because I no longer needed to explain anything. Some endings don't require closure, just distance, and as for me, I never moved. I kept living in the modest apartment above the station, upgraded the plumbing, fixed the windows, kept Baxter's bed by the door. He passed not long after our first shipment left the facility, quietly, in his sleep, like he knew the fight was finally over. I buried him behind the shop, near the hatch, under a mesquite tree that bloomed brighter that season than any year before. No marker, just memory. Looking back now, the story people think they know is that I inherited a gas station and found $200 million in lithium. But that's not the real story. The real story is that I was doubted, mocked, pushed, erased, and I didn't break. I didn't scream. I didn't fold. I just kept going. I listened. I watched. I waited. And when the time came, I stood up not to fight, but to hold my place, quietly, with clarity. And I proved that being underestimated isn't a weakness. It's just a pause before the reveal. So, if you're watching this, wondering if it's worth it to keep pushing when no one sees you, if it's worth staying when everyone says, leave, ask yourself this: what if the thing they said was worthless turns out to be the most valuable truth of your life? And what if the only reason they wanted you gone was because deep down they knew